Sometimes the longest roads we drive are not the ones made of asphalt, but the ones that lead us back to the people we thought were home. They say distance makes the heart grow fonder, but no one tells you what to do when that same distance reveals something you were never meant to see. I learned that on a long 12-hour drive, when I tried to surprise my mother-in-law. Hello everyone. My name is Sarah, and this is a story about how one weekend trip turned into a journey that changed the way I understood family, love, and loyalty. In this story, you'll meet my husband, Adil, and his mother, Amy, a woman I used to think of as my own. But sometimes, even the kindest smiles can hide the deepest secrets. It was early spring when all of this began. That time of year when the air smells like new beginnings, and the sunlight feels gentler on your skin. Adil and I had been living in Lahore for almost 6 years since our marriage. Life was steady, not perfect, but peaceful. We had a small apartment, a rhythm, a routine that made sense. I worked from home, designing handmade decor for online clients. Adil worked long shifts as a civil engineer. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. And for me, that was enough. His family lived about 12 hours away, in a quiet town called Murray Valley, tucked between hills and pine trees. I loved visiting his childhood home. It had a big wooden gate that creaked when you pushed it, a courtyard where Amy grew jasmine vines, and a veranda that looked out toward the forest. Every time I went there, I felt grounded. But it had been a while since we last visited. Amy hadn't been feeling well, and Adil often said, "Sarah, she's getting older, I should go alone this time." At first I agreed. I didn't want to tire her with guests. But lately, something in Adil's tone started to sound different. Gentle but distant. One Thursday evening, I found him packing a small overnight bag. He said, "Just for the weekend. Amy needs help with some house repairs." I smiled. "Then let me come too. It's been months since I saw her." He froze, just for a second, before shaking his head with that soft half-laugh he used when he was uncomfortable. No, you'd be bored. There's dust everywhere, workers coming and going. I'll go this time, you rest." He kissed my forehead and zipped his bag. But as he left, I caught a whiff of something familiar, not perfume, but that earthy pine scent Amy used to wear whenever guests arrived. That was strange. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the ceiling fan spin slow circles. Adil had always been a loving son, but something about his recent trips felt rehearsed. He would return quieter. His phone, which once lay openly on the table, now stayed face down. And when I asked about Amy's health, his answers were vague, "She's fine," or "Nothing serious." Still, I didn't push. Maybe I didn't want to know what I'd find. The next weekend, while scrolling through my photos, I found an old picture of Amy and me in her garden. Her arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing, our aprons covered in flour. I missed her. So I decided to do something spontaneous, something loving. I would drive to Murray myself and surprise them both. I imagined her face lighting up, her hands cupping my cheeks like she always did. Maybe I'd even cook her favorite lentil soup and give her that shawl I'd been saving. I packed quietly, sent Adil a simple message, "Going to visit Mom tomorrow," and didn't wait for his reply. By dawn, I was on the road. The sun rose behind the mountains, painting the sky in orange and gold. I stopped twice, once for chai, once for petrol, humming along to old radio songs. The air grew cooler as I climbed higher. My heart felt light. But as I reached the familiar curve near their street, something odd caught my eye: the gate. It wasn't the same faded green the first remembered. It was freshly painted red, and there were 2 cars parked outside, one of them definitely not Adil's. My first thought was simple: maybe they have guests. But when I entered the driveway, I noticed something stranger. A pair of men's slippers by the main door. Not the kind Adil wore, and not the size of any guest I knew. Still, I smiled to myself. Maybe it was nothing. I rang the bell. Once, twice. No answer. So I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not jasmine. Not the warm scent of curry like Amy's home always carried. It was cologne. Strong. Masculine. Then faint music coming from the back. Old romantic Urdu songs playing softly. And voices. Adil's, and another man's. And then Amy's laugh. That laugh, high and warm, the one she used to reserve for family dinners, now sounded different. Lighter. Almost flirtatious. I froze in the hallway, clutching my shawl, my throat tight. For a moment, I thought maybe my mind was tricking me. Maybe I was hearing wrong. But when I took one more step toward the guest wing, what I saw next stopped my heart cold. Point 4. The guest wing had always been quiet. A place Adil's father used to use for guests before he passed away years ago. But now, its door was wide open, curtains drawn back, sunlight flooding in. And standing near the window, arranging flowers into a vase, was a man I had never seen before. Tall, maybe in his late 50s, dressed neatly in a crisp white kurta. He looked comfortable, too comfortable, like he lived there. Behind him, Amy stood in her pale blue dupatta, humming softly as if this were her morning routine. When she turned and saw me, her face went pale. "Sarah?" she gasped, her hands trembling just slightly. You're here?" I smiled, trying to hide the confusion rising inside me. "Yes. I thought I'd surprise you. I drove all night." Her eyes darted toward the man behind her. He froze for a moment, then smiled politely, stepping forward. "You must be Sarah," he said. "I've heard a lot about you." I stared at him, then looked back at Amy. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." Before Amy could answer, Adil appeared from the hallway, his hair damp, as if he'd just showered. His expression said everything his lips didn't. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" His tone wasn't surprising, it was panic. Laughed lightly, though my chest felt tight. "What do you mean? What am I doing here?" "It's your home. I came to see Amy." I looked around. "Looks like you've got company." Amy quickly moved toward me, clutching my hands. "Oh Beta, I was going to tell you. This is Rafiq Sahib. He's an old family friend. He's been helping with the house repairs." But something in her voice didn't match her words. There was warmth. Not the formal warmth of gratitude, but the quiet tenderness of someone hiding a secret. Rafiq smiled again. "Just trying to make myself useful around here." I nodded slowly, forcing a polite grin. "That's very kind of you." Then I looked at Adil. "You said the same thing, house repairs. Guess I walked into the middle of it." He avoided my gaze. "Sarah, you should have told me you were coming. You must be exhausted." "I'm fine," I said softly, placing my bag on the couch. "I'll just freshen up." But inside I was trembling. When I entered the guest room, the one Adil and I usually stayed in, it was different. The walls were freshly painted, the curtains new, and there was a faint scent of perfume, not mine. I sat on the bed, staring at the folded towels, the tidy arrangement of things. Everything looked too polished, too lived in. I could hear faint laughter from the living room again. Amy's voice, Rafiq's low chuckle. Something wasn't right. And the more I looked, the more I noticed. A pair of men's shirts hanging in the guest wardrobe. A toothbrush that wasn't Adil's. A book on the side table with the name, Rafiq Ahmed, written in neat handwriting. I wanted to believe it was innocent. I really did. But my gut whispered otherwise. At lunch, I tried to act normal. Amy served biryani, her hands shaking slightly every time she reached for a dish. Rafiq sat at the head of the table, the spot where Adil's father used to sit. Adil barely touched his food. So Rafiq Sahib, I began, trying to sound casual. How long have you been helping with the house? He smiled. Oh, a few months now. Ever since your husband started visiting more often. Amy shot him a look, sharp, warning. Adil dropped his spoon. Sarah, maybe you should rest after the drive. But I kept my voice steady. No. I'd love to know more. Rafiq leaned back, oblivious to the tension. Well, your mother-in-law needed someone around. She can't manage this place alone. I offered to stay in the guest wing for a while. It's been nice, actually. Feels like home again. His words hit me like a quiet slap. Home again. Amy's hands froze midair. Rafiq, enough, she whispered, forcing a smile at me. Sarah, beta, you must be tired. Let's have tea outside. But the silence that followed was heavy, full of everything none of us were saying. Later that evening, when the sun dipped behind the pines, I stood on the veranda alone, staring at the house I once loved. I could hear them inside, talking softly, laughing again. And every sound cut deeper. When Adil joined me, I asked quietly, how long has he been here? He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Sarah, please don't start. Just answer me. He looked away. A few months. And you didn't think to tell me that a strange man was living here with your mother? He's not a stranger. He's someone Amy trusts. I turned to him, disbelief burning in my chest. Adil, that's not the point. You lied to me. You told me you were fixing things, not hiding something like this. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Sarah, listen. It's complicated. Amy's been lonely. After Abba died, she needed companionship. Rafiq came back into her life and what? I whispered. She moved him in. Adil closed his eyes. They're together. They've been seeing each other. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd react like this. I felt my breath catch. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. Together? Amy, my gentle, dignified mother-in-law, living with a man in secret, under the same roof where her late husband's photos still hung on the wall. React like what, Adil? I asked, my voice trembling. Like someone who just found out her husband's been lying to her for months? He didn't answer. So I whispered. You didn't just protect her secret. You helped her hide it. And that night, as I lay awake in that cold, unfamiliar house, listening to the faint laughter from the guest wing, I realized something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't my home anymore. The next morning, sunlight poured through the thin curtains, cutting through the dust that shimmered like tiny gold flakes in the air. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that man's face, that easy smile, sitting where Adil's father once sat, and Amy, smiling back like she had nothing to hide. When I stepped into the kitchen, Amy was already there, stirring tea. Her dupatta was pinned neatly, her bangles chiming softly, the picture of calm. But her eyes, when they met mine, carried something deeper. Guilt, maybe. Or defiance. Good morning, Beta, she said like everything was fine. Did you sleep well? I wanted to scream no. But I only nodded. I did. Thanks. We stood in silence, the only sound the soft simmer of chai. Finally, I asked, Amy, how long has he been living here? She froze for a heartbeat, then placed the spoon down carefully. Since winter, she said quietly. It was too cold for him to stay alone after his wife passed. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. You mean to tell me you've had a man living in this house for months, without telling your own son's wife? Amy sighed, turning away. You wouldn't understand, Sarah. Then help me understand. I said, my voice soft but firm. Because right now, it feels like my husband and you both lied to me. She finally faced me. I was tired, Beta. After your father-in-law died, This house was too quiet. Rafiq started visiting to help with small things, and one day, it just felt right to have someone around again. I swallowed hard. So you started living like husband and wife? Her eyes narrowed slightly. You don't know what loneliness feels like until you've sat in this silence for years. And I didn't owe anyone an explanation, not even you. That last line stung. Not because of the words, but because of the cold truth behind them. I went outside to clear my head. The garden still smelled of jasmine and wet soil, but it didn't feel like the same place anymore. Every flower bed looked staged, every smile rehearsed. Adil found me sitting on the bench under the old pine tree. He sat beside me without speaking for a while. Then quietly, "I didn't want you to find out like this." I looked at him. "You think that's the problem?" "The way I found out." He rubbed his temples. "Sarah, Emmy's not doing anything wrong. She's an adult. She has the right to choose companionship." "And what about honesty?" I asked. "What about respect for her husband's memory? For this family's name? For us?" Adil sighed. "This is between her and God, not us." I shook my head slowly. "No, Adel. It's between all of us. Because you involved me when you started lying." He looked at me, his jaw tight. I was trying to protect peace. I laughed softly, bitterly. Peace built on secrets isn't peace, Adil. It's a performance. Later that afternoon, I noticed the neighbors whispering near the gate. Two women in shawls, glancing toward the house as they passed by. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read their faces: suspicion, judgment, gossip. It wasn't just a secret anymore. 2 weeks later, I got a message. From him. "You really couldn't just let me go, could you, Emma? You always have to control everything. I'm not coming back. Stop chasing ghosts." For a moment, my hands shook with anger. Then something in me steadied. He wanted to make me angry. He wanted me to be emotional. Because that was the woman he knew. The one who would forgive, forget, and fall apart. But that woman was gone. I took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to Clara. "Add it to the case file," I wrote. And then I blocked him. A week later, Sophie and I went to a support group for women dealing with financial betrayal. I didn't say much at first. I mostly listened. Stories of women who lost everything to men they trusted. Women who built lives from scratch again. By the end of the session, something shifted in me. I wasn't alone. When it was my turn to speak, I said quietly, "My husband sold our house while I was in the hospital. For a long time, I thought I was the problem. But now I realize I was just the proof of his guilt. And I'm done carrying his shame." The room went silent, and then a few women nodded, some even clapped softly. And that was the moment I knew I'd begun to heal. Even before justice was served. Weeks passed, and the case moved faster than anyone expected. The authorities in Singapore froze the rest of Daniel's assets. His attempt to open a fake company was exposed, and an international warrant was issued for his arrest for document forgery and fraud. Clara called me one afternoon with the update. "Emma, they've detained him." For a second, I didn't believe her. Detained? Yes. He tried to transfer funds again. He's being held while the case proceeds. I didn't say anything. I just sat on the couch, my hands pressed together, feeling still. Not joy. Not revenge. Just peace. But you did. And maybe the only way I can forgive that is from far away. She looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "You sound just like your father." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, bittersweet. He also walked away when the truth became uncomfortable. And with that, she turned and walked back inside, her dupatta fluttering behind her like a curtain closing on a play that had gone on too long. When I got into my car and started the engine, my hands were trembling. I looked up at the house one last time. The same walls that had once felt like family, now filled with strangers. As I drove away, the mountains loomed quietly behind me, their peaks fading into mist. For the first time, I wasn't sure where I was headed. All I knew was that I couldn't go back, not until I learned how to build peace that didn't come from pretending. The drive back home felt longer than the one that took me there. 12 hours stretched into a kind of silence I hadn't known before. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet that comes when everything you believed in suddenly collapses. Every few miles, I thought of turning around, of demanding a better explanation. Something that would make it all feel less like betrayal and more like misunderstanding. But then I'd remember Adil's face, calm, detached, unbothered, as if my pain was just another inconvenience to be managed. By the time I reached Lahore, the sky had already dimmed to that bluish-gray twilight. I unlocked our apartment door and stepped into the still air. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My teacup still on the table, the laundry basket half full, Adil's shoes lined neatly by the rack. Nothing has changed here. Except me. The next few days were a blur. Adil called a few times, short, uneasy conversations. Are you okay? I'll be home next week. Please don't tell anyone about Amy. That last line stung the most. Now I miss you. No. Imsuri. Just don't tell anyone. I began to realize that the man I thought I'd married, honest, loyal, gentle, was someone I had imagined. The real Adil was a son first, a husband second. And I had been naive enough to think love could ever compete with blind family loyalty. One evening, while folding laundry, my phone buzzed with a message from one of Adil's cousins. Nimra, a bright, outspoken girl who often visited Amy. Sarah Baji, is it true that Amy has someone living with her? People in the neighborhood are talking. I stared at the message, my throat tightening. It had already begun. The gossip, the slow unraveling of secrecy. I typed back carefully. I'm not the one to confirm that, Nimra. Maybe you should ask Adil. Seconds later, she replied. He's not answering my calls. Everyone's saying weird things. I just hope you're okay. That one line, I just hope you're okay, was enough to break me, because for the first time, someone had asked how I felt. 2 days later, Adil returned home. He came in quietly, setting his bag down like a man preparing for an argument. I was sitting on the sofa reading. I didn't look up right away. He stood there for a while before speaking. Sarah, we need to talk. I closed the book and nodded. Yes, we do. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. Things are getting messy. People are talking. Amy's upset. She thinks you might have said something. I let out a bitter laugh. You think I'm the one spreading gossip? I haven't said a word, Adil. The truth doesn't need me. It's already walking around your mother's house. He flinched. Sarah, please don't twist this. She's a grown woman trying to live her life. I leaned forward. No one's denying her right to happiness, Adil. But when happiness starts in lies, it hurts everyone around. You lied to me. You hid it. That's not respect. That's betrayal. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. I just didn't want to upset you. You didn't want to deal with me, I corrected quietly. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that feels like a wall. Finally, he said, so what now? I looked at him. That depends on you. Do you even see what this has done to us? He didn't answer. And that silence, that one moment of emptiness, told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few weeks, I started rebuilding small parts of myself. I worked longer hours, started jogging in the mornings, reconnected with friends I'd been distant from. At night, I'd sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering how many homes were built on secrets like ours. How many women were out there, sitting quietly, pretending everything was fine. One afternoon I got another call, this time from Nimra again. Her voice was shaky. Sarah Baji, Ami's neighbors told everyone. There's talk that she's been living with Rafiq uncle without marriage. The mosque committee even asked questions. I closed my eyes. The thing I had feared was happening. What about a deal? I asked. He's gone there again, she said, trying to calm people down. That night, Adil called me from the car. His voice was tense. They're humiliating her, Sarah. People are saying disgusting things. Rafiq's family is angry too. It's out of control. I stayed quiet. He continued. You don't understand, she's my mother. I can't just stand by and watch. I never asked you to, I said softly. But this chaos didn't come from me, Adil. It came from the lie you both chose to live in. He sighed deeply. So what do you want me to do? Tell the truth, I said. To her. To yourself. And maybe to God. He hung up without replying. Weeks passed before I heard from him again. Then one afternoon he returned, tired, defeated. He told me Rafiq had moved out. Ami had shut herself away, refusing to answer anyone's calls. I think she's ashamed, he said quietly. Maybe she's healing, I replied. Sometimes shame is just the body recognizing the truth too late. He looked at me for a long moment. You've changed, Sarah. I smiled faintly. No, Avel. I just stopped pretending. For a while, I thought we might find our way back. We tried having dinner together again, and tried polite conversation. But something fundamental had shifted. Every word between us carried unspoken weight. Like we were two actors still performing a marriage that had already ended in silence. One evening he said softly, Sarah, I can't lose both of you. I looked at him. Then you'll have to choose which truth you want to live with, hers or mine. He stared at me, eyes filled with exhaustion. I don't know how to choose. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer waiting for him to. The next morning, as dawn light spilled into the kitchen, I brewed myself a cup of chai and stood by the window, breathing, for the first time in months, without fear of confrontation. I didn't know what would come next. Separation maybe, or a quieter version of love. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would no longer build my peace around other people's secrets. The call came early one morning. That kind of call you can tell isn't going to bring good news even before you answer. It was Nimra again, her voice shaky. Baji, there was an incident at Ami's house last night. My heart sank. What happened? She hesitated. Some men from the neighborhood threw stones at the gate. They shouted things, called her names. Said she brought shame to the community. Adil tried to stop them, but it got ugly. I closed my eyes, my hand gripping the phone tighter. The image that came to mind, Ami standing behind that red gate, trembling, made my chest ache. No matter how angry I was, I hadn't wished for this. Is she okay? I asked. She's not hurt, Nimra said. But she hasn't come out since. And Rafiq's uncle left town. People say his family pressured him to. For a moment, I couldn't speak. This was what lies always did in the end. They burned quietly at first, then exploded when truth caught fire. That evening, Adil returned home again. He looked drained, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled, spirit heavy. I opened the door for him silently. She's not talking to anyone, he said, collapsing into a chair. Not even me. She says God is punishing her. I sat across from him. No, Avel. People are. God doesn't humiliate, people do. He rubbed his face. I can't bear to see her like that. For the first time, I saw genuine pain in him. Not defensiveness, not avoidance, but sorrow. And despite everything, my heart softened a little. Maybe this is her moment to face herself, I said quietly. Not as punishment, but as a realization. He looked at me, eyes wet. I wish you could see how kind she was to him, Sarah. How she smiled again after years. Maybe it wasn't right, but it made her feel alive. I nodded. I don't doubt that a deal. But sometimes the way we chase comfort ends up hurting everyone around us. The story spread quickly through the small town. Some people whispered in pity, others in judgment. I overheard one of Adil's aunts on the phone saying, "Old women losing their shame these days. What example are they setting?" I wanted to scream at her. What about the men who left them lonely in the first place? But I didn't. I'd learned silence could be more powerful than shouting. Soon, Amy stopped going to the market. The jasmine vines she loved so much withered without her tending. Adil visited every weekend, bringing groceries and sitting by her side, trying to coax her to eat. He told me she barely spoke, only prayed day and night. One afternoon he called from the road. "I think she's ready to talk to you," he said softly. "Would you come with me this weekend?" My first instinct was no, but something in his voice, weary broken, made me pause. "I'll come," I said finally. The next morning, we drove back to that mountain town. The road looked the same, but I wasn't. The gate was still red, though faded now, chipped in places. The jasmine vines had gone dry, their flowers brown and curled. When we entered, the air felt heavy with silence. Amy sat on the veranda, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes distant. She looked smaller, frilier, like time had folded her in on herself. When she saw me, her lips trembled. "Sarah," she whispered. "You came." I nodded. "Yes, Amy. I came." For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I made a fool of myself, didn't I?" My throat tightened. "You're human. Humans make mistakes." Tears welled in her eyes. I thought love was supposed to make you feel young again, not destroy your peace." I moved closer and took her hand gently. "Love isn't wrong, Amy. But hiding it, that's what hurts. Especially when you make the ones who love you most part of that lie." She nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. I was afraid of being alone. I squeezed her hand. "And now?" She gave a small, broken smile. "Now I see that being alone isn't the worst thing. Losing yourself to someone else's comfort is." Her words stayed with me long after that day. Before we left, she said something I'll never forget. "Sarah, you've always had a calm strength. I see it now. Promise me one thing. Don't let your marriage drown your peace like mine did." I looked at her, then at Adil, who stood silently by the doorway. "I promise, Amy," I said softly. "I'll protect my peace, even if I have to do it alone." She nodded, then whispered, "Good girl." On the drive back, the air between Adil and me was heavy with unspoken truth. He finally said, "You were right." "About what?" He looked out the window. "About lies. About pretending. About everything." I stayed quiet. Sometimes acknowledgement is more powerful than apology. He reached for my hand hesitantly. "I don't know if I can fix this." I turned to him and said gently, "You can't fix what isn't broken in one place, Adil. Your mother's truth was hers, but yours is what you do next." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Do you think we can start over?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "I think we can start honestly. That's the only kind of start worth having." That night as we returned home, I unpacked quietly. Adil came to the kitchen doorway, watching me for a moment before saying, "You know, Amy said she wants to visit us someday. She said she wants to make peace with everything." I smiled faintly. Then maybe there's hope after all. He exhaled deeply. Maybe there is. And for the first time in months, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like space, like something new trying to grow where the lies had been buried. It's strange how healing doesn't happen in one grand moment. It happens quietly, in small, almost invisible ways. A softened glance where there once was anger. A shared cup of chai without words. A morning where you wake up and realize the ache doesn't weigh quite as heavy anymore. That's how it was for me and Adil. We didn't rebuild overnight. We didn't even try to go back to how things were, because how things were was built on pretending. Instead, we started from where the truth had left us, raw, fragile, and painfully honest. One evening, a few months later, Amy called me herself. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, but calm. "Sarah Beta," she said softly. "I was thinking, maybe I could come stay with you for a few days. I don't like being alone anymore." My heart skipped. I hadn't expected her to ask. "Of course, Amy. This is your home too." She chuckled lightly. "That's kind of you to say. I just hope you're not saying it out of pity." I smiled to myself. "No, Amy. I'm saying it because forgiveness feels lighter than bitterness." There was a pause on the line. Then I heard her sniffle quietly. "You're a good girl, Sarah. Better than I deserved." When she arrived the following week, she looked fragile but different, softer around the eyes, humbler in the way she moved. She brought with her a small box of homemade pickles, and a folded shawl that smelled faintly of jasmine. We sat together that first night, sipping tea. For the first time, I didn't feel resentment sitting across from her. She looked at me and said, "You remind me of who I used to be before life hardened me." I smiled. "Then maybe you can start being her again." She laughed, a small honest laugh that filled the kitchen with something I hadn't realized I'd missed, warmth. Over time, things between us found a strange kind of peace. Adil became quieter, not distant, just more thoughtful. He started taking evening walks alone, sometimes coming home with wildflowers he'd picked along the way. I'd watch him from the balcony, and in those moments, I saw a man trying to learn how to be gentle again, not just for me, but for himself. One night he came to me with a hesitant smile. "You know, Amy made halwa today. She wanted to save some for you." I looked up. "She did." He nodded. "She said it's her way of saying sorry." When I tasted it later that night, it wasn't perfect, a little too sweet, the semolina clumped in places, but somehow it felt like grace in a bowl. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I overheard Amy on the phone with one of her old friends. She was saying, "No, I don't blame anyone anymore. Maybe this was God's way of teaching me to love without hiding." Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it. That's when I realized, she wasn't the same woman I had once resented. She was healing too, just in her own way. Spring came early that year. The balcony, which had been barren for months, suddenly bloomed with new life. Small pots of basil, mint, and marigolds. Amy would sit there in the mornings, humming old songs while trimming leaves. Sometimes, she'd call me over just to show how a new bud had opened. It felt symbolic somehow, like the house was learning to breathe again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Adil and I sat outside with her. The three of us shared a quiet dinner. No tension, no old wounds floating between us. Amy broke the silence first. "You know," she said with a smile, "people in town still whisper about me. But I've stopped caring. I tell them, at least I made my mistakes honestly." We laughed softly. Then she turned serious, looking at both of us. "Don't let this world turn your hearts bitter. No matter what happens, always choose the truth. It hurts, yes, but it's the only thing that sets you free." Her words lingered long after the night fell. Later that night, Adil and I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer below. He said quietly, "Do you ever think we'll really be okay again?" I looked at him for a long moment. Maybe okay isn't something you arrive at. Maybe it's something you rebuild, one honest day at a time. He smiled faintly. "Then I want to keep rebuilding." And for the first time, I believed him. A few months later, Amy decided to return to her home. Before leaving, she hugged me, long and tight, and said, "Thank you for not turning my son against me." I whispered back, "Thank you for finally letting him grow." She smiled, kissed my forehead and said, "You're the daughter I never had, Sarah." When she left, the apartment felt a little emptier, but in a peaceful way, like a chapter closing gently. It's been a year since then. Adil and I are still together. Not perfect, not storybook, but honest. He still visits his mother every month. She calls me sometimes, just to ask what I'm cooking for dinner. Sometimes, she even sends me her old recipes. And every time I make one, I think of that red gate, the jasmine vines, and the day I realized that truth, no matter how painful, is the only soil where love can grow again. Maybe forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just means choosing peace over pain, every single day. And that, my friends, is the story of how one woman's secret tore through 3 hearts. And how, somehow, truth stitched them back together. So tell me, which city are you listening to tonight? Crescent Moon. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and follow. Because somewhere out there, another woman might just need to hear it too. Red Heart. You know, life has a way of testing the corners of our hearts. Sometimes it does it softly, through distance, silence, or time. And sometimes, it comes crashing down, shattering everything we thought was safe. When I think back to that long drive, 12 hours of hope and exhaustion, imagining laughter and chai waiting for me, I realize I wasn't driving toward home. I was driving toward the truth. And truth doesn't always look like comfort. Sometimes it looks like betrayal sitting at a dinner table. Sometimes it sounds like your husband saying, "Please don't make this worse." Sometimes it feels like the weight of a house that no longer belongs to your idea of love. But truth, as painful as it is still a kind of light. It burns, yes. But it also reveals what's broken, what's missing, what's real. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that their lies broke you, please know this. You can rebuild. Not the same way. Not with the same walls. But with gentler hands. With boundaries made of self-respect, not fear. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying, I'm free now. Free from carrying their shame on my shoulders. Free to love again, without pretending. I don't know what you're carrying tonight, or what door of your heart feels too heavy to open. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to walk through it. Not for them. For you. Because peace isn't found in fixing others. It's found in finally choosing yourself, and still wishing them healing from afar. So my dear listener, tell me, which city are you listening to tonight? Drop it in the comments below. And if this story touched something inside you, don't forget to like, share, and follow. Because somewhere out there, another woman might just need to hear that she's not alone. Crescent Moon, Red Heart.